all. Well, welcome to the first in our series. This is Mike Schindler with Operation Military Family, and we are doing the Vision 2020 Live on Purpose. We're doing the webinar series in the midst of everything that's going on in the world. Crazy times, interesting times. We could probably talk a lot about all the different processes, methods, and everything, different countries that, different things that countries are doing to kind of combat this invisible enemy. I'm just going to call it an enemy, this pandemic that we're all going through here in 2020. And with me today, I've got our first guest, our first lineup, Steven Elliott. Steven Elliott is so great. And I've had the opportunity to just be with Steven multiple times. Tremendous human being. His story, we'll get into his story a little bit. He's got a great book too, if you guys have not read this, called War Story. Kind of catalogs his experience in Afghanistan and his service with Pat Tillman, and that whole issue, that whole scenario that came out of that, of which I know, Steven, you'll share a bit of that. But Steven, welcome to the first in our series of this Giving People Hope, Living on Purpose series. So welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, so I want to frame this for everybody that's plugging into this. The reason we're doing this truly is to give people a sense not only of hope, but ways that they can execute in their own life that will help them move forward through this period of time and hopefully come out of this stronger. And I know those of us who have served in uniform, we all have different experiences, some more tragic than others. And what's interesting is if we're still here, that means we made it through it, right? And it might have not been pretty getting through it, but we're here.
Right.
So I just kind of want to kick it off and just say, Steven, why don't you let our audience know a little bit about you and kind of the framework of your story.
Yeah, so I'm from the Midwest originally. I grew up in Kansas and grew up as a kid, had designs on military service. I played a lot of G.I. Joes, like a lot of kids do. Grew out of that. I don't mean that in a derogative way, but as I grew older, I had plans on going to law school and didn't plan on military service until 9/11 rolled around. And that sort of changed everything for me. I very much, in retrospect, I viewed the lens of manhood through the lens of military service. And I don't think that wasn't a conscious choice. It was just based on the men that I was around and I respected. Most notably my grandfather, who, he served in World War II for a year and a half in Italy as an artilleryman and came back home and was a farmer. And so he was sort of this living, breathing, example of the American Expeditionary Force to Europe in that time. And so I think I saw my own story through that lens of, our nation is at war against, this group of terrorists. What are you going to do about it? Yeah. And so I was going into my senior year of business school, and I enlisted, and I wound up with the intent of serving within the Ranger Regiment in the Army, and I was successful at that. I graduated college in May of 2003 with my business degree, and then 3 weeks later, I was at sunny Fort Benning, Georgia. And interestingly, the drill sergeants and the Ranger cadre at Fort Benning were not nearly as thankful for my service as everybody else was after that point. So
isn't that so true? Like,
yeah, it is.
I remember, what got me in was Top Gun.
Right.
And, I saw that movie and I'm like, man, I'm gonna fly cool jets, date Kelly McGillis, right? All that stuff. And then you get to boot camp and you're like, what the heck?
They don't care. Yeah, they don't care. It's like, drill sergeant, do you know my GPA? Like, right. I can do cost accounting all over the place. I don't feel like you're giving me the appropriate respect here. Yeah. But no, it was definitely a culture shock, and I found myself, that's how I came to Pacific Northwest, which is where my family has lived for the last 14 years, is by virtue of 2nd Ranger Battalion. And so I was assigned to 2nd Ranger Bat, fall of 2003. When I got there, the battalion had just gotten back from its first deployment to Afghanistan that fall, and had just sustained its first casualty. And so that was the war. I mean, to think that that's 17 years ago, I just can't even believe that for a lot of reasons, because it doesn't feel like that long ago. but that was the very early stages of the war. And then we deployed, our company was deployed to the Afghan-Pakistan border in the spring of 2004. And I served in the same platoon as two brothers, Pat and Kevin Tillman. And I knew them both reasonably well. I knew Kevin better just because he and I were in the same squad. We were in the M240 Bravo machine gun teams for our Ranger platoon. And on April 22nd, 2004, while we were deployed on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, our platoon was ambushed. And there was a variety of mitigating circumstances that contributed to that. But at the end of it all, we had sustained 4 casualties, 2 dead and 2 wounded. And as it came to be very quickly understood, within 24 hours, all of those casualties were sustained as a result of friendly fire. Oh, wow. And one of those casualties, one of those that was killed, was an Afghan military soldier that was fighting with us, and the other was Pat. And then as we continued to put pieces together, it became evident that there's likely 2 people or one of 2 people that fired those fatal shots, and I'm one of those 2 people. And so,
and I can't even imagine. I mean, number one, you're talking friendly fire, which is never good, right? I mean, nobody likes to hurt their own. You're in this one team, one fight to go ahead and take on the enemy, and then to find out that you might be the reason behind a brother's death is, I mean, the weight of that. And before we go into the weight of that, Stephen, because I think this is important, because I think a lot of people in the world right now are feeling a lot of weight for a number of different reasons, right? They're facing their own battles, they're having their own experiences. But I want to frame who Pat Tillman is, because there might be some who don't know who Pat is. Pat played in the NFL. He left the NFL to join the Army, right? And then became a Ranger. And he was kind of put at the pedestal of America's G.I. Joe, for lack of a better word, right? I mean, talk about living out your story, playing with G.I. Joes and then serving with what America essentially coined as G.I. Joe. And then to be potentially responsible for his death. So walk us through that experience for you when you found out. What was that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, you go, I mean, I was in shock for a long time, and I'm very good at compartmentalizing, which to some degree, I think the military in general, and then specifically units like the Rangers in particular, tends to self-select for people who are good at that, because you have to. And that's just an adult skill anyway. Like we don't get to, as parents, we don't get to stop and process our feelings in real time with our kids. We just have to parent, like we just have to get stuff done. And then there needs to be a time to unpack that and deal with whatever it is that you've experienced. So I think I went into a mode of rationalization. I went into a mode of really trying to intellectually sort out how to lay blame. It was easy to, in some respects, we were put in a situation we should have never been put in. So in some respects, I could say, well, it wasn't my fault. Like the way that you deal with the weight is just by putting it on someone else. Yeah. Saying it's not my weight at all. But then there's other times where you say, well, but it wasn't your company commander who was manning that weapon. It wasn't your company commander staring down those sights. You made that choice. And so I think for me, like I doubled down for a while on just trying to rationalize and intellectualize, because I think the wound to my being was so deep, because my identity up to that point had been based on my performance. I was a good performer. I was a good student. I was a good presenter. I knew how to curate an image to the world that was success. And this, and serving in the Rangers, although there was an altruistic element to that, there was also a selfish element to that. I wanted to have a feather in my cap that I could look back and say, look, I did this during a time of war. Isn't that cool? But now the thing that was going to be a mark of distinction, it wasn't just indifferent. It wasn't just, well, you were a C- Ranger and you just don't talk about it much. It was a complete and utter disgrace that you can't talk about it, or you can't answer too many questions from people about it before kind of having to shut the conversation down. Otherwise, you're going to have, they're going to be, even the most casual conversations at a party. It's just like people wouldn't know they're 1 or 2 steps removed from revealing a pretty dark secret of mine, if you will. So I doubled down on all of that, and then eventually just system broke because I couldn't deal with the stress. I couldn't deal with the trauma of that. And I didn't feel like I deserved sympathy for it because after all, I'm the one walking around with all their fingers and toes and their family, and Pat's dead. Yeah. And other guys got wounded because of me. And so then how do I reconcile all of that? And ultimately it was a very long process of my ego just being destroyed, which needed to happen. And to a point to where I could raise my hand and say, I'm not doing okay, and I need help. Regardless of where you lay blame, I'm hurt and I'm wounded, and I don't have the tools that I need to fix myself. And that was.
I want to jump in here, Stephen, because there's a lot that you've shared in just the last couple minutes that I think are so important, especially relevant for this time.
Yeah.
And that is, you addressed ego, you addressed, why people do the things they do, and suddenly falling from a perception or an image or a position that we have in society that is suddenly removed or suddenly attacked, right? And we have to address that internal battle. And that's really what you're talking about, which I think is so relevant to this time right now, because there's so many people. I don't care if you're a six-figure, I don't care if you're somebody that's just serving tables. Your position in life doesn't really dictate who you are as a person, right? Even though we oftentimes think it does. And so people are wrestling with this self-image of, wait a second, I'm this guy, but I'm this guy because of a title or a position I hold, right? When in fact, what you're saying is you had to allow, I saw a great quote, and I can't remember who said it, but I think it was Rowling, who said, I had to hit rock bottom to build a solid foundation, something that point, right? Like, and I think that's what you're talking about is I think there's many people in the world right now that are hitting a rock bottom emotionally, financially, spiritually, maybe even. And what I love about your story, and we could spend hours on this. I mean, your story is so compelling. And you catalog it, and I said I wouldn't promote anything on this, and I really am going to promote your book though, because your book is so good. It tells your story, and there's so much in there that you wrestled with. I want to address this because I want to be sensitive to the time on this. How did you prepare yourself mentally? Because I know you addressed the struggle and the things that happen, the alcoholism, the self-medication, just, everything, emotionally, physically, and I don't want to give that away. But you came out of that on the other side. How did you get your mind right? Because I think that is a key for people in this current circumstances. How did you get your mind right?
Yeah. There's two things, I think, primarily when you boil it down. One is praying. I had to come to a place where, for me, I had to be constantly reminded that, number one, I'm not in charge. And that's actually a really good thing. As much as that may irritate me in certain circumstances because I think I know what needs to happen, it's really, really good that Steven's not in charge. That's a good thing for me. That's a good thing for my family. That's a good thing for everybody. It doesn't mean that I don't have authority or responsibility. It doesn't mean I abdicate work. Work is good. But it means that at the end of the day, the work that I do is not about fulfilling my agenda. And that's freeing. And so I think I had to come to that place of letting go and just continually being reminded of the fact that it's not only am I not in charge, but also the story that is my life and the story that is being written in the world today. It's not about me. It's not about my pay. It's not about my title. It's not about my accomplishments. None of that matters. But I get to participate in this story. I get to participate in community and family and work. And that's really great. But it's freeing to just kind of have it not be about yourself. And then I think the second piece of that is we have a very, regardless of your spiritual orientation or lack thereof, we live in a culture that is so individualistic, we don't even realize it because it's the water we're swimming in. And so even within spirituality, oftentimes it is implicitly or explicitly presented as this is your personal These are your personal demons. These are your personal issues. You go lock yourself in your closet or go on your retreat, read your books, do whatever you need to do, get yourself right, and then come back to the world as a fully functioning, more empathetic human being. And the problem with that is that no meaningful change, in my experience, happens outside of the context of community. If you're not gonna, you can't learn vulnerability by going by yourself and reading a book. The only way you're gonna learn that is practicing that with other people. And that takes risk. When you raise your hand and say, I drink myself to sleep every night. And then I wake up and I put on my suit and tie and I'm whatever I am in my day job. That's a risk. And that's exactly the sorts of risks in healthy ways that we need to take in order to grow as people, is we have to invite others into the conversation. And it's too easy when we're under stress, when livelihoods are threatened, when image is threatened. It's too easy to double down on isolation, withdraw, and not lean into that stress by saying, hey, I don't know what to do. I may be okay, but I feel I'm scared. I'm scared right now. And I could sit here with me and my phone at 2 a.m, scrolling until my thumbs fall off and just scare myself to death. Or I could actually talk about it with some people and say, what do you think of this? Like, this is kind of getting to me. Is that real? What should we be worrying about? What should we be doing? I think there's so much freedom. There's so much more freedom than we, particularly as Americans, exercise to lean into community precisely at the point that we're most vulnerable, because that's the place that we need it. That's the place that community can grow.
And I think that's so important, especially now. I mean, and you talked about a couple of things that I want to be sure that I feature and highlight, because you talk about, and I'm going to kind of put words in your mouth, Stephen. Just if I'm saying it totally wrong, just say, no, that's totally wrong. But,
Okay.
but I think what you were getting at in that first phase is, regardless of your spirituality, is if you learn to let go, and just really, I think taking that the next step is you let go. It doesn't mean that you're absolving yourself of responsibility or absolving yourself of activity or work or anything. But I think what you're also saying in that is control what you can control.
Yeah.
Which is, listen, understand that you can only control what you control. The outcome oftentimes is outside of your ability to control.
That's
so
right.
Just do you well.
That's right.
And do you well also means that you oftentimes can't do that in isolation. You have to do it in community. So get your brotherhood, your sisterhood, get your battle buddies, get the people, your community, your tribe, however you want to frame it or phrase it, and be sure that you are committed to growing in that.
Yeah.
I think that's so important today when we're talking about, social distancing or physical distancing, however you want to say that too.
Yeah.
My wife and I joke where I'm like, it's not so much social distancing as it is physical distancing, because I think this is an opportunity for us to be more social. And that we can, do those buddy checks if we need to, and we can, check in with family members, and we can do, video calls and FaceTime and, whatever you want to do. I think there's a need to do that more. And that's what you're talking about is,
yes,
this is an opportunity to build community.
Yes.
As we move through this, and we're coming up on time, and I want to open it up to questions, but what would you say are one or two things that people can do, like understanding, getting the mind right, understanding, we've got to plan through this. How do I execute when there's so much chaos? Like, I don't have a job, or my income's severely impacted, or I'm freaking out because I don't even know when this is going to end. And is it going to end? And are we going to go back, to the way things were? We don't, there's a lot of unknowns, right? So what are you telling people in your sphere how to level set or condition set and execute and not get paralyzed by fear?
Yeah. I think one of the first things, real brief, one of the first things is we have to taking control, we have to take control as individual humans as to when and how we open ourselves up to data and information. That sort of discipline is critical, and it always has been. We know that, if the first thing you're doing every morning is checking your smartphone, then that's the wrong thing. Because effectively what you're saying is that this device is more important, or the information it can provide to me, or the death toll in Italy, or what Andrew Cuomo said, or what Trump did or didn't say, or whatever the latest thing is that may be important, is that the time and space for you to interact with that information?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it? So now you know that an extra X number of people have been sick or died. What is that? Maybe you work for the CDC and you need to know that information. I don't know. But I think it's important to ask that question and build parameters around that, particularly now, because the information is so volatile and it feels more weighty. The news is always can feel weighty, but it feels more weighty because we're feeling these aftershocks from something that started halfway around the world that's now, dramatically impacting how all of us live in different ways. And so I think whatever that means to you, you know what that means. And I think you have to build safeguards around that information. I think that, and maybe for me, what that means is the first thing I do in the morning is not look at my phone. I'm doing something physical, I'm praying, I'm reading, I'm building a buffer between me and the world. And then I check in. I have specific times that I check in on the news towards the end of the day. But I think that's really necessary. So I think one, just build safeguards around how you interact with that information.
Yeah.
Two, I think it's just considering keeping moving forward. If you had a plan, if you had things that you were working towards prior to this, really just asking yourself the question without fear, without anxiety, are those things still relevant? Do I still move forward with those? Knowing that this phase of what we're experiencing, it will end. Like there will come a day when we're not sheltering in place. That will happen. We have faced far greater tragedies and travesties in our nation than this. And this is significant, there's no question. But we will move through it. And so this is a time possibly for work to be done in preparation for what's on the other side of it. So I think really asking yourself the question, if I've stopped moving forward with something, is that because that business or that idea is no longer relevant? If so, then okay, let it go. Or have I stopped just because I'm afraid? And the second is not a good reason, because this will end. But I think then the third, I think just we have to make peace with the fact that the world is different. That this is not there's two I think extremes. One extreme is that the world has changed and we will always be in isolation and we'll be wearing masks to the grocery store for the rest of our lives. Yeah. I don't think so. On the other extreme is the fact that this is a blip. Once we get past it, it's back to business as usual. That's not true either. The world is decidedly different, and it's different in ways that will take months and years to fully understand. But we have to move forward in confidence, knowing, and really flexibility, just continuing to let go and saying, well, I think I know what I'm supposed to work on today. So I'm going to do that today.
Yeah.
And then if tomorrow, what I was working on yesterday is completely irrelevant with new information, okay, then I'll work on the next thing. But I think it really, we have to just become hyper-focused on, to your point, what we can control, knowing we live in a new paradigm, but knowing that that paradigm will unfold one day at a time. And each day for all of us has enough trouble of its own. So let's just focus on that and then take it as it comes. That's kind of how I think of it during this time.
Yeah, I think that's important to remind everybody is this is going to be different coming out of it, right? But this is also, and I think words have such tremendous power that how we frame our situation too makes a difference, right? Which is, we could say that we're in quarantine, but quarantine obviously means that you've probably been affected by the COVID and you're in lockdown, right?
Right.
Or you're shelter in place. And I'm choosing to use this as a growth opportunity. Like, what can I lean into to make myself better? And I think that's what you're saying too. And I think that's so important. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in. One says, we cannot deny our fear. It's real. How do we navigate through the situation while not denying our fear? Such a great question.
Oh, that's hard. It's a really good question. I think implicit in that is when there's fear, we usually have fear because there's a risk of loss.
Yeah.
right? And so I am afraid. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of myself being hurt, others I care about being hurt, my job being lost, or I'm staring at very real loss right now. And I think part of this, I'm not going to answer the question particularly well, but I think part of this is there has to be freedom. There has to be freedom to lament. There has to be freedom to mourn. There has to be freedom for that, because I think, again, those are two extremes, if you want to frame it that way, where either we are, in the fetal position, immobilized by fear, which is not healthy, it's not good, even if the fear is real, or we're disconnected from reality in some way, and we've just shut off our emotions, and we're in this task-oriented box that is just actually using productivity or using, whatever space that we have to grow, but we're doing it divorced of the actual reality in which we're living in. A reality in which, for me, I don't wait tables right now. I used to. I mean, I used to valet parked cars, and I would have been 20 years ago. I would have been one of those people out of a job. Yeah. And so it's weird for me, because in many respects, our livelihood right now is pretty secure, and yet I know that there are people, in our community that are reeling, and so I can't just be the person. If I'm going to be helpful, I can't just be the person divorced from that reality. Mm-hmm. And so I think to some extent, there's probably more freedom for us to lean into our fears and just acknowledge them. That sometimes is half the battle, is just naming it, because then you name it, you talk about it, you get it out of your head and into the world around you. And maybe you realize that fear isn't as big as it seemed when it was inside of you. But I
think your point is good. You have to address it, right? You can't ignore it. And I want to wrap this up because we're coming up pretty close, but there's a couple questions and we can't get to them all. This person is great. I'm going to call him out, Ichabod, who was a radio person for years. So hopefully we lived up to his expectations. Steve mentioned my identity is not based on my performance, which I love. And he said, I would like to know what it is based on.
For me, it's based on, I'm a Jesus follower, and it's just based on the fact that I'm created, as we all are, I believe, in the image of the divine, and I have value because he created me. And it's from a place of belonging, not a place of performance. Just like I have two daughters, 18 and 8. They have a seat at our table as a family, regardless of what they do or don't do. It doesn't mean that there isn't discipline. It doesn't mean that there aren't sometimes hard conversations to be had, but they are accepted as a person. They're loved as our daughters, regardless. And I believe that truth is real for every human being. And that's what I base my identity on. And it's from that place that I have freedom. And that's actually in some respects, it's a harder place, because then I have to say I'm sorry a lot. Oh. I have to repent a lot. I have to forgive. But that's the place upon which my identity rests.
I love that. I love that. Steven, that's a great way to end this. I want to be sure. I mean, thank you. This is so good. Hopefully it adds value to people's lives, which I believe it will. You've always added value to my life, and I'm grateful to you for that. And if people want to know more about Steven and his story, it's called War Story. Steven, you've been so committed to even improving the mental health of our warriors, those who have served in combat, those who have even not served in combat, for that matter.
Yeah.
Helping people get back on a pathway to success. And I just want to encourage people to check Steven out, to hear more about your story. God willing, we're doing the Vision 2020 big conference in October.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of a way to tease people into that in some ways, but also to give people hope. And I think it's so important that people stay hopeful through this time.
Yeah.
Really design a plan. So Steven, thank you for being a part of this. Thanks for kicking it off. And for those of you who want to plug into the next ones, they're coming up. April 10th is the next one with Frank Shankwitz. He's a co-founder of Make-A-Wish Foundation, which I know many of you are probably familiar with. Such a great guest. And Steven, you'll be joining him in October as well. On stage. Very exciting. So again, thank you all to those of you who plugged into this, and we look forward to seeing you in the next round on April 10th. Steven, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
You betcha.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.